Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another Omnibus review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Batgirl Returns Omnibus. Now, this is, I think, a fairly recent release. I think it came out earlier on this year. And it is a book that I believe is still readily available, or at least not too hard to find at the time of uploading this video at least. So I thought it would be a good one to cover today and just kind of do my usual thing really, give an overview of the book, a look through it, and a discussion of the material and, just share some of my thoughts. Now, this particular run is quite an interesting one. It was part of DC's New 52 relaunch back in 2011. And of all of the different series that relaunched at that time, this is one of the most, and maybe the most controversial of all of them, which is kind of saying something because there were quite a few controversies involved with the New 52, especially during its early days. But yeah, the issue really that a lot of people took with this was what was done to Barbara Gordon. So as a little bit of background context, this is kind of important to know going into this book. Back in 1986 or 87, when Alan Moore and Brian Bolland did the classic Killing Joke story. In that story, spoiler alert here I guess, in case you don't know this, but in that story, Barbara Gordon was shot by the Joker. And as a result of that, she was left paralysed, and that remained in DC continuity for quite a long time, for about 20 odd years up until this reboot. And during that time, Barbara Gordon had been mostly known as Oracle. She was kind of a information broker for the DC Universe heroes. She was in a wheelchair, and that was kind of what she did. She was a badass in her own way, but she wasn't Batgirl. And then all of a sudden, the New 52 came along, and Barbara Gordon was reinstated as Batgirl, and her time as Oracle was undone. So very controversial to a lot of people. Now, it's not the incident that happened to her is not completely undone. The events of the Killing Joke still took place in this continuity, and we'll see some of that when we look through the book, and I'll kind of go into that in a bit more detail as we discuss it. But let's just take a look at the book without any further ado. That's kind of the background context out of the way. So the cover is this really nice Adam Hughes cover, which is pretty cool. Other than that, it's fairly simple design. You get the creator names down here. Gail, Simone, of course. There's a few different artists who worked on the series. The spine, I think, is really nice. There's this kind of purple theme, purple motif is very common within the book. It's a key colour that's used in the design. It features on the back as well here. There's a bit of a description there, a blurb. You could feel free to pause that and read that if you like. But basically, you're getting the full Gail Simone run on Batgirl from the New 52 in here, which was mostly issues 0 to 34, the first two annuals, and a couple of other bits and pieces. On the book itself, underneath the dust jacket, you get this really nice cover. I think this is by Fernando Pasarin. Apologies if I'm mixing that up with one of the other artists, but I think that's the case. But anyway, it's a really nice image. On the spine, on the actual book, a slightly different design. And then the back is just plain. It's this kind of plain black and purple colour scheme. And then we'll jump right in then. So, as always, I will say spoiler alert here. Just give a little fair warning because, like my other videos, I'm going to be going into this in a fair amount of depth. And just want to say now, in case you don't want to hear anything about this run or, you don't want to hear much, I probably will discuss some plot points that perhaps you don't want to know. Now, I won't discuss everything in the book because there's just a lot. But yeah, just always want to give that warning just in case. So within the book, again, this kind of purple colour schemes running through it. I'll say straight away, there is no contents, there's no table of contents in here, and there are no page numbers in the book itself, so you're going to have a hard time trying to know what issue you're on or getting to a specific issue in the book if you're looking for something in particular. But there is this nice little intro. So 3 years after a savage attack that nearly ended her life, the brilliant Barbara Gordon returns to the streets as both survivor and avenger. Now that savage attack is referring to the events of Killing Joke. So that, as I said, that still happened in this continuity. But she was left injured as a result of it for far less time than she had been in the pre-New 52 continuity. And as of the start of this run, she has recently regained the use of her legs, and she is getting back into being Batgirl again. And that's the status quo as of the beginning of this run. Now, a few things to say. Now, what I really like about this run, I will say overall, first of all, I really enjoy this book. I really enjoy this run. I think it's a really cool take on Batgirl and specifically on Barbara. And I think that Gail Simone was the perfect writer to handle this. People might not have liked the fact that Barbara was back as Batgirl, but it wasn't as simple as just she's taken some kind of instant cure and suddenly she's physically perfect again. She is very much traumatized by the events that she's been through. She's still got a kind of PTSD, referring to the Killing Joke incident. In fact, straight away here you see some flashbacks to that scene. She's very much haunted by it. It's affecting her psychologically. And she has a kind of survivor's guilt as well, you know, in a way. It's kind of like she doesn't feel like she deserves to be able to walk again when there are other people who suffer serious injuries who can't. And Simone writes all of this stuff really, really well. It's kind of really, really well handled. And the key thing that she does a lot, that Gail Simone does so well in this run that stands out, is these little kind of internal narrative boxes that she gives, in which we get great insight into Barbara's thought process as she's going through the things that she's doing. And it's really, really well written in terms of exploring her character and letting us see that she is often unsure of herself. She's nervous, she can have self-doubt, etc. But also we see the flip side of that sometimes, where she really relishes in what she's doing and she's just has these moments of kind of pure bliss that she's able to do this again. Really kind of interesting psychological exploration of the character and what she has been through and what she's doing now, you know. And then in terms of the stories themselves, I will say this: there's a lot of really dark stuff in here, you know, like darker than you might expect it to be if you've never read this run, if you don't know much about it. There are some almost downright horror stories in here. Really, there's a lot of violence in there. There's a lot of supernatural stuff, and yeah, it's really quite strange if you're not expecting it. Batgirl really gets into some weird stuff in here, stuff that often she's kind of in over her head, and again that is often stated explicitly by Simone in terms of letting us see Barbara's thoughts based on what she's being confronted with. Yeah, but a lot of really cool stuff. So this first villain in this arc is called the Mirror. None of the villains in here are particularly iconic. They're not necessarily memorable ones that are going to stick with you in general, but I think that the stories that involve them are really good in the context of this series. And I'll say that for me, and this might seem like an obvious point, but the key character and the key reason that I kept reading on and enjoying it was for Batgirl herself, was for Barbara, and to see her development and see how Simone kind of further progresses her story through this run, rather than an interest in the villains specifically. And it helps, though, that all of this is really well drawn by the various artists. So you get art in here by Ardian Syaf, Fernando Pasarin, Vicente Cifuentes. There's a couple of fill-in issues by Ed Benes, and I don't think there's any art in here that I disliked. I think I liked it all. Some of it slightly more than others, but I think that this, for example, this stuff is really nice. Looks really good. And, you know, as is the case with basically all the new 52 stuff, I would say that this is really very new reader friendly. So if you've never read any Batgirl before, if you've never read Barbara Gordon in any stories and you're interested, I would say this is a great point. All you really need to know about, the only element of pre-New 52 continuity, as I say, is the Killing Joke, which, you know, I highly recommend you read that anyway, if you haven't already. But even if you haven't read it and you don't feel like specifically reading it, the only thing you really need to know is that Barbara unfortunately got shot in that story. But trust me, it gets referred back to enough times in here that even if you hadn't read that book, you'll be fine. But there are some cool plot developments, though. I think one of the key things is a strong focus on the Gordon family. So Barbara Gordon is the daughter of Commissioner Gordon, and she has a brother called James Gordon, and he is basically a psychopath. He's an actual kind of serial killer. So he turns up, he causes problems, You know, he's a key character, a key plot point through some of it. You get crossover stuff with the Court of Owls storyline that was going on in Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman. There's also crossover stuff with the death of the family, again from Snyder and Capullo's Batman. So you do get appearances by the Joker in here, and I tell you, that's a really interesting story, given the significance of that previous event of the Killing Joke. Within this continuity, her meeting with the Joker for that death of the family crossover is the first time that she's come across the Joker again since then. So that makes for some pretty interesting stuff in terms of how it makes her feel and how she handles it. And overall, I just think it was really well written. You know, the writing was just really well handled. I think Gail Simone clearly has a great respect for this character. She had written her for quite a while prior to this, back when she was Oracle. Gail Simone had done a fairly lengthy run writing Birds of Prey a few years before this. So she'd been writing Barbara Gordon for a while, and I think it's quite clear to see, in fact, you know, I'm not really saying that I'm thinking about it, I'm 99% sure that she does. It's quite clear. This is some of that Ed Benner's artwork. He's a very good artist. Kind of wish he'd drawn more of it, to be honest, but as I say, none of the other artists do a bad job, so it's not an issue. Not to me. You do get some flashback stuff as well, so some kind of issues that go to the past, and for example, there's a story here that explores the first time Barbara tried out a bit of vigilantism. Batman does appear a few times throughout this story. Not very often, but he does show up now and then. And it's usually pretty interesting when he does, because the dynamic between Batman and Batgirl, in this continuity at least, was not quite as, don't know the right word, not quite as friendly, let's say, not quite as amicable as it was with the Robins. So Batgirl was kind of like the partner that Batman never intended to have, but sort of accepted her anyway. Unlike the Robins, the various Robins who he specifically kind of picked and mentored them, Barbara kind of became Batgirl of her own accord rather than because of Bruce Wayne choosing her. So that's kind of interesting, kind of an interesting dynamic. And you know, as I flick through here as well, you get an idea of some of the other art styles, like this one being more kind of realistic style with Catwoman guest appearing. This is more Ed Benner's work. And this is up to the point where the Joker's appearing, so this is as a tie-in issues with Death of the Family that was going on in Batman. So this is the super creepy Joker who's wearing his own severed face as a mask. Super creepy stuff, honestly. This version of the Joker is particularly freaky. But the Death of the Family crossed over into all the different Bat titles at the time. So it was in here, it was in Nightwing, it was in Red Hood, Catwoman, Batman and Robin. You know, all of them. Can't remember all of them off the top of my head. But I think out of all of them, the point is, I think that this one was the best of the bunch. Purely because of, you know, Batgirl, Barbara's history with the Joker. Which I guess kind of applies to Red Hood as well with Jason Todd, but nevertheless, I still think this is the best one. You get little bits of romance in here as well. Barbara does get a boyfriend of sorts in here, but it's not all simple and happy and fun. It's a bit more complicated than that. You know, because basically she doesn't really catch a break in here very often. It's a lot of dark and disturbing things happening to Barbara that kind of keep her constantly stressed out, constantly on edge. And she does get to a couple of points where she's on the verge of giving up because she just feels like it's too much. She can't handle it. But then she keeps going and showing her resilience. And it's, yeah, as I say, it's a run that I found to be a great read. This is one of the more kind of horror characters. It's this creepy woman and her kind of possessed dummy. She's like a ventriloquist, and the dummy is kind of alive, and it's got these nails in its hands, and it stabs people with them, and yeah, honestly, quite violent. As I say, and that's just one of the sort of violent stories that goes on. So I do feel like this is really quite a mature comic. You know, I wouldn't say this is really very suitable for younger readers. So that's kind of just a fair warning. You know, when I say it's violent, I do mean it. When it gets violent, it gets violent. As I say, verging on being just like horror stories at some points. Which is not a bad thing for me, you know, I'm cool with that, but it's just worth pointing out because I know it wouldn't be for everybody based on that. And I certainly wouldn't recommend it, as I say, to young readers who might think, oh, you know, Batgirl comic, that might be good for my son or daughter to read. Not this one. Not, in my opinion, anyway. Well, I mean, it depends on their age, obviously, but yeah, I'd be careful. This is a 0 year tie-in. So 0 year being the kind of early days of Batman, set in Gotham's past, around the time Bruce Wayne had come back to Gotham and just started being Batman. There were 0 year crossovers again, a lot of crossovers in the Bat titles with Batman that show what the other characters were doing at that same sort of time. So this is one of Barbara's stories. And you get another early story here where she was wearing this white suit. And then things get supernatural again, with a vampire story comes up here. Quite a lot of supernatural stuff in here. And then, you know, the artwork changing again to another style. I think this style towards the end of the book, probably my least favourite overall of the stuff in here. Poison Ivy appearing here. It's I think it's the story with the Birds of Prey, actually. The Birds of Prey was still around in the New 52. Batgirl is kind of working with them now and then, so they cross over into this story. Black Canary and Huntress here. And then by the time you get to the end of the run, there is a kind of distinctive finishing point for Gail Simone's run. She ends things on a pretty distinctive end point that then runs into the next era of Batgirl. Which I think is going to be collected in another omnibus coming out soon. I think it's Batgirl of Burnside omnibus. And in the back you get your extras, you know, some variant covers, some character studies, and designs. Cool stuff. Yeah, so overall, a good book, I would say. A great one to pick out. One of the best series from the New 52, in my opinion. Kind of would probably make it into my top 5 from that era, anyway. So yeah, it's a book that gets a thumbs up from me. I think it's worth checking out as an introduction to Batgirl. But as I said, just do be aware that there are some quite dark elements to the stories. So, you know, keep that in mind just in case that's not for you. But hopefully, as I've given a look through this book, it's given some level of insight into whether or not you think it might be something you're interested in or not. So yeah, I hope it's been helpful in one way or another in helping you make that decision. But yeah, as always guys, thank you very much for watching, for sticking with me through the video. I do appreciate that as always, and any support you can give. And yes, I will be back soon with something else to discuss. See y'all guys.